Welcome to the launch of the It's Been Said podcast. I'm your host, SAI Executive Director, Lisa Remy. Each show will be dedicated to conversations on leadership as we further SAI's mission to support, encourage, and develop Iowa's educational leaders and learners. In this episode, hear from 2022 Iowa Teacher of the Year, Sara Russell, who offers 3 C's for educators, and who will share her insight on the teacher shortage as well as suggestions for reducing educator burnout. Sara is a 20-year veteran teacher at Pleasant Valley High School. She teaches social studies and does so by leading student-centered, hands-on learning. Russell and her husband, Ian, and their 14-year-old twin sons, Gavin and Aiden, live in Bettendorf. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about yourself so our audience can get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. I'm actually not a native Iowan. I've actually lived in Iowa the last 20 years. I was originally born in Duluth, Minnesota. When my then fiance, now husband, and I moved to Iowa, he is a native Iowan. I've got my first teaching job at Benton Community High School in Van Horn, Iowa, and I actually started my career in special education. There were so many just valuable things I learned during those first 3 years of teaching that I still carry with me today. I know it's not feasible, but I really truly believe that every teacher should have some experience working with special education students because there's just so much to be learned. My husband and I moved to the Quad Cities in 2005, and that's when I first became employed with Pleasant Valley Community School District. I actually started working in their career center, and then I also did a long-term subbing position at our alternative school, which was also just an incredible experience. So then for the last 16 years, I have been teaching social studies, a variety of different subjects, and I also really enjoy working with a number of different student organizations at the high school. I'm very passionate about people, and even though I'm not in the classroom teaching this year, I've been back in the building at least once a week, they'll tell you, and I'm trying to continue working with those student groups.
Very good. So, Sara, when I was doing a little bit of research after you were selected as the 2022 Teacher of the Year, what I found is that your message really has a 3-pronged approach. So you talk about courage, compassion, and collaboration. So can you elaborate for us on those 3 C's, please?
Sure, I would love to. When I think about what it means to be courageous in education, it's really about not being afraid to fail, but more so it's the importance that we're setting up systems that allow students, teachers, and administrators to be able to kind of fail safely. And by that, I mean, in my own life, I've experienced the most growth when I've been kind of pushed outside of my comfort zone. And I think we can all think of experiences where something didn't go the way we intended. And at the time, we were probably really frustrated. But then we look back on it later and realize, oh, that was a huge moment of personal growth. And that's really important for our students. I think educationally, we would call that productive struggle. But we also have to make sure that students feel like they can productively struggle in a very safe and supportive environment. When I think about compassion, I think we often use the word empathy. And the reason I like the word compassion is that compassion is really having empathy, recognizing what other people are going through, but then also having a real desire to help. And that's just so typical of what education is. When we look at the adults who are involved in education, they want to help. They want to help students. Administrators want to help teachers and students. So obviously it's a very, helping oriented profession. And it's just important too, again, to kind of go back to if we want to be able to have people take risks and take challenges and challenge themselves, they do have to feel safe and supported in their buildings. And that goes all the way from students to administrators. And finally, with collaboration, it's so important for us to collaborate kind of within each level. It's important for our students to be able to collaborate together. PLCs for teachers are very important in collaboration. But the most important thing to me is collaboration between those levels. So like I mentioned earlier, I really enjoy working with student groups because I think when students and teachers sit down around the table where everyone has an equal voice, it's amazing what can be accomplished. And then from a different level, I feel the same way when administrators and teachers sit down, or teacher leaders and teachers sit down and have those conversations. because it allows us to empower voices that maybe aren't always empowered. So we need to empower the voices of our students when they're in those conversations with teachers, and we need to empower the voices of our teachers when they're in those conversations with administrators.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your message there. And one of the things I think about is when you talked about the courage to fail and how much we learn from failure, right? And I think what I've seen over my educational experience is that sometimes it's challenging because as an adult, we don't want to fail in front of our students, or I see students who really, it's challenging for them to go through that productive struggle. So what would you do in your classroom, or what have you done in your classroom to help students really see that it's okay to fail? It's more about learning from that failure than the failure itself.
I think the first thing that I always do is really trying to set up from day one a supportive and positive class culture. And I also think we have to be really intentional about, for instance, student collaboration and student groupings. So I like to lead my students through the setting of classroom norms, because students understand how they want to be treated and how they should treat others. But when you put them, again, when you empower their voices, then you increase that buy-in by them to that we are going to maintain or behave a certain way in this classroom. And I do want to be very clear that we're talking about norms versus rules. Like, there's obviously the rule that your cell phone goes in the parking lot, but a norm would be, for instance, that we are going to respect and value each other's unique identities, things like that. And so I think once you establish that classroom culture, then students do feel like they belong, and they feel like they can maybe take those academic risks because they're with a supportive group of people. So it's really that relationship piece between teacher and student, but also the students themselves. And it's amazing too, when you've established that class culture and those norms, we all have little slip ups, but it's amazing how quick a whole class may call a student on that slip up even before I have a chance to. And it's not in a accusatory way. It's more like oh, hey, just remember that's not something we say in this class. And so then that you've really established that culture where students feel safe to take risks. But as I said previously, I think it's important that our teachers have to feel that support as well.
Yeah, so great segue. So as we think about, the School Administrators of Iowa, our organization is in service to our Iowa administrators in all levels, from assistant principal, building level leaders, central office leaders, superintendents. And so when you think about, Sarah, the 3 C's, so courage, compassion, and collaboration, how does that message relate to our administrators when we think about, again, as you said, working with our adults in the building?
I would say that one of the first things that I really think about in relation to that is just that idea of modeling. So just as we want teachers to model to students how you follow norms, or this is how you have a respectful conversation, our administrators need to also be modeling that to our teachers. So it's one thing to ask our students to be courageous, compassionate, and collaborative. But again, we also need to kind of see that at all levels. And then the school then as a community embraces certain ideals. So that's how I would really see that fitting in with administration, is that ability to model that, the teachers model that. It's stuff that we do all the time.
Yeah, and previously you mentioned about teacher voice. So is it possible to elaborate on that a little bit? So as we think about administrators, how can they ensure that they're getting teacher voice into a professional learning or in a PLC, or making sure teachers' voice are heard as well?
That's an excellent question. I think in a PLC setting, because they're often smaller groups, just as we might put students in smaller groups to make them more comfortable to speak up, I feel like PLCs provide a really nice opportunity for teachers who maybe wouldn't be willing to speak up in an all-staff meeting, but are interested in speaking up in a smaller group. Now, you do bring up an interesting question, and I think this is one that's maybe not so easy to answer, is then how does that translate up to administration? And I think it's, part of it is just providing opportunities for administrators to listen to teachers, whether it be voluntary, faculty meetings, whether it's just relaying that message that, their door is always open. I think that teacher leaders can also serve as kind of a conduit between teachers and administration. And so I think if you've put out this message in your school that you want that kind of communication and feedback from your teachers, that's the first step. I know different schools try obviously surveying their teachers, and it all comes down to that people have to feel like they can be honest, or the feedback you get isn't going to be quality anyway. So I would say that, the idea of being approachable, maybe using those leaders as kind of that connection between the two, and just giving teachers a lot of different opportunities.
Great. Thank you. So we know that social emotional learning has been something that really has been, I guess, emphasized more so even previous to the pandemic, but the pandemic really helped us see how important social emotional learning is. So talk to us about the role that SEL plays in the classroom from your perspective.
It plays such a crucial role in the classroom. And I appreciate that you brought up the pandemic, because as you said, this has obviously been on our minds before the pandemic. But I think we saw when students didn't have daily contact or in-person contact with their peers and their teachers, we saw the way that students suffered socially and emotionally. So I think that if anything, I'm kind of a silver lining kind of person, but if you want to look at maybe a silver lining of having gone through hopefully the worst of the pandemic, it has helped us to realize we do need to focus on the social emotional learning of our students, and that it can't be something that's just a drive-by, so to speak. It has to be something that's intentional and meaningful, because teachers, and for a long time, they've played more than just an academic supportive role. But teachers are being asked on a daily basis to play different roles for their students. Sometimes it is as almost a counselor. And so not only do we need to make sure that our students are learning ways to advocate for themselves and have self-care, but it's so important that teachers know how to do that for themselves, but also how to recognize that in their students. It's really exciting that we're seeing such a movement across the state of Iowa, focusing on social emotional learning. Because if students are, the students may be very academically strong, but then if something is happening emotionally in their life, that's going to be what needs to take precedence, and some of that academic stuff falls to the side. So we really have to meet all the needs of our students.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for that. And I appreciate you also bringing up, the teachers' social and emotional health as well. We know that it's difficult for adults to take care of our students, or our administrators to take care of our teachers and our staff, if we're not taking care of ourselves as well. So what advice or what can administrators do to really support staff in the social emotional area?
I think a lot of it comes down to giving teachers some grace. And by that, I think it's that almost public recognition that administrators can give to their teachers, just recognizing that they know that they're struggling. Unfortunately, there's not really a one size fits all for how to help teachers, because for some teachers, it may be that they need to give themselves grace and say, I'm not bringing home papers tonight to grade. For other teachers, and I'm one of them, I like to just power through and get things done, because when my plate is, so to speak, clear, then that helps me feel calmer. So, and I know that we look at a lot of, there's a lot of advice about, taking walks and doing meditation. And for some people that'll be very effective, and for others it won't. As far as, what we can do in the school setting, I think anytime administrators can create time for peer support for teachers. I think we do a great job with having mentoring programs for our new teachers, but our veteran teachers struggle as well. And time is precious for all of us in and outside of school, and inside school, especially time, it just never seems like there's enough. But I feel like anytime you have that ability to make time and space for that peer support, I think it can be very transformative for our teachers.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I do think when you said it's very specific to the individual, right? It is, it's hard to say, hey, this is what I think is best for you. So maybe even just asking, having administrators ask when you see that somebody may be struggling as well, like what would work for you? And sometimes just being able to acknowledge, right, that we're struggling and that's okay.
And I think you bring up such an important point, because for some people, they're very open with saying, I'm struggling. But I think there's a lot of people who aren't used to vocalizing that they're struggling, and they feel like even vocalizing it is a sign of a weakness. And so I think it goes to maybe a greater need for social emotional learning in all of society, and that it's not, and it goes back to issues too, I think, of how we viewed mental health in this country, that we do all struggle, and some people are better at hiding it than others. But I think that when we help our students understand that struggles happen, but there are ways to navigate them, I think that really helps this next generation and their views on mental health.
Mm-hmm. This kind of makes me think about educator burnout as we talk about SEL. And I'm not saying they're necessarily a one-to-one correlation, but it does sometimes get put together, right? So what strategies do you believe leaders can implement that would help reduce the educator burnout?
I would say that whatever we ask educators to do, it needs to be very intentional and very meaningful. And that's not to say that educators are being asked to do a lot of things without meaning, but I do think that when you are teaching all day and you're trying to keep up with, giving students feedback and grades, and maybe corresponding with parents and serving on other committees and working with students outside of school, I do feel like it's a lot. Teachers don't put in a 40-hour week. Many of them put in almost double that. And so I think that when we ask teachers to do additional things, we need to make sure there's always like a clear vision or mission, so that teachers feel like whatever they're being asked to do has again an intention and a clear meaning. And for some teachers, I think also just again that recognition and that appreciation is very important. And for some people, if you tell them good job, maybe that doesn't have a lot of intrinsic, meaning, but for some teachers it will. And I do think that we do, as our schools get larger, and when people get busier, they're more likely to kind of just go off into their separate corners and their rooms and barely come up for air, so to speak. And so again, I would emphasize that finding ways for teachers to have built-in supports. I think PLCs play a big role for that. But even again, the idea of mentoring, even with veteran teachers. When I've served as a mentor for new teachers, I have always found it so beneficial, because while I hope I'm imparting a lot of wisdom on my mentee, I also learn so much from them. And again, it's that human connection. And I think even having conversations about, hey, this is what I went through today. Oh, it's kind of frustrating. And someone else was like, oh, I'm kind of frustrated about that too. Let's come up with a solution together. I think that helps kind of those feelings of helplessness that I think ultimately does lead to burnout.
Yeah. So when you think about, we've talked about SEL, teacher burnout, and as we're hearing, there's, again, some are in the national news as well as in Iowa, connecting that to teacher shortage. And so we know that we started the school year in some of our Iowa schools where we weren't fully staffed. So I guess I'm wondering, what do we need to do here in Iowa that would help not only retain staff that are currently in our buildings, but we know that we also have fewer going into the profession. So how can we elevate or increase the number of people who really step up and say, education, being a teacher, this is something I really want to do. I want to serve kids.
And this is an issue that really, every time I think about it, it really breaks my heart that so many young people do not want to go into the education profession. I mean, I think we as educators understand that a strong education system is just crucial to the survival of our society. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that. We are shaping the children that are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And I believe also that, the pandemic once again proved just how important schools are to society, and just how I'm so proud of how many Iowa districts were able to kind of take on those additional roles during the pandemic. Not only were we educating children, but a lot of districts were feeding children still, finding a way, for instance, to get them breakfast and lunch. So again, when I hear that people don't want to go into education, it does sadden me. I think there's a few things that we need to look at. One, I very much like the kind of grow our own idea that's been proposed, looking at people we already have in education, possibly working as para-educators and finding ways for them to get the needed training to be teachers while still being able to work. Because I know that going back for a teaching career is a degree in teaching, especially as a second career, can be cost prohibitive. I also think that we have a number of districts across our state who have teaching academies where you're trying to pull high schoolers in and getting them excited about the profession of education. So I think that the spread of those and having more of those available is important. I also wonder too, and I'm not sure what the logistics of this would be, but when I think about like student teaching, I think student teaching is crucial to becoming a, confident educator when you start. But it's also like you're paying money to have an apprenticeship. So students are paying tuition, and then they're also teaching basically a full-time job. So I wonder if there's ways to look at how that experience could be funded. And I'm not necessarily advocating that it needs to be a paid position, but I wonder if there's a way to offset the cost to the student while they're doing that, because that's, again, another, financial burden. And then I think the final thing I would say, and I wish I had the magic answer to how to do this, and you alluded to it already, is kind of the public perception of teachers, and not just in Iowa, but across the country. There's just a lot of noise, I would call it, kind of surrounding education right now. And it tends to be a lot of negative noise. And I think sometimes that's very discouraging, because it may seem like there's a lot of opponents to education or what schools are doing. And I always have to remind myself that if you're happy about the way things are, you're generally not, shouting it in the streets. So we need to find a way, I think, though, to get a lot of those positive voices out there. And I'm not sure, again, I wish I had the answer. I'm not sure how we do that, how we go about doing that. But it's an amazing profession. I wouldn't imagine doing anything else with my life. And it makes me sad to think that others don't want to go into this profession.
Yeah, I appreciate all that you said there, Sarah. And one of the pieces I think too that you mentioned is so important is we need to tell our stories. There's a lot of positive happening in education and across our great state. So how can we make sure that those stories are there to try to bring the positive versus, as you said, the noise into thoughts around, and maybe they're similar, but how about retaining the current educators that we have? What strategies or what advice would you give administrators?
Again, I don't want to sound like a broken record on this, but I just think we cannot underestimate the importance of strong mentoring programs. We need, when we have, especially, I know that we are losing veteran teachers, but we're also more often losing teachers in those first 5 years. And so how can we set up programs where where teachers feel, valued within their own building, where they feel like they are supported? It doesn't even necessarily have to be, because I know in some of our smaller districts, you might get hired as the junior high social studies teacher. So we have to look beyond just, for instance, like subject alike mentors. And there's people in the building who have knowledge to share. At one point a number of years ago, I got the chance to mentor. It was a teacher who had transferred to our building, but he was an English teacher and I'm a social studies teacher. And for him, he was an experienced teacher, but he was new to our district. And so there were a lot of things that I could kind of tell him about that were kind of district specific. but it was an important connection. It provided him an additional connection outside of his department. So I just think that it's important that we create opportunities for new teachers where they can interact with each other, interact with obviously mentors, either from their area of their subject and also outside. I also think professional development is so crucial in retaining educators. We all, the old adage is you don't know what you don't know. And so I think sometimes, especially for new teachers, they don't realize they don't know something until all of a sudden they're kind of confronted with it. So it's just so important for us to try to anticipate what those needs of the new teachers will be so that they feel as equipped as possible to handle any situation that may arise.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you bringing in professional learning, because I too believe that quality professional learning can make a difference for staff. So attributes. So what attributes would you look for in an administrator and why, Sara?
So you won't be surprised to hear that I firmly believe that our administrators need to show those 3 C's, that they need to be courageous, compassionate, and collaborative. I also will go back to the cliche of if talk is cheap. I think you can say a lot of good things, but we really see the measure of someone's character by the actions that they take. And so we obviously expect our leaders, administrators, principals to be well-versed in education, but I also think they have to be well-versed in people. And just as we work to form relationships with our students, they need to be passionate about people. They need to be passionate about students and teachers as well. And again, we need them to model what we want to see in the classroom. We need them to model how we want teachers to act. And so it's not a short list, but I think it's really important that our administrators are reflections of what we want to see from our teachers and our students.
So what advice would you give leaders
I would just say, and this has come up earlier in our conversation, but that you need to have conversations. Our leaders need to have conversations with their teachers. They need to have conversations with the students. You do need to ask the people, so to speak, what they need and what their thoughts are. And it doesn't mean that, obviously all the input you get is going to necessarily yield something productive, but it's also that idea of letting people know that their voices are being heard. And so I just think that, again, it goes back to relationships. It goes back to those conversations and just making sure that you're following through with both of those.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. All right. So kind of a different type of a question, but as you know, reading, right? Professional learning,
Yes.
Individual. So what are you reading right now? Is it something that I might want to put on my reading list?
Well, I just started reading Lead from Where You Are, Building Intention, Connection, and Direction in Our Schools. So that's by Dr. Joe Sanfilippo. And I've just found that to be really inspiring because it really is talking about taking those first steps in having, as it says, very intentional leadership. I've really enjoyed some of the little kind of tidbits of you've got 5 minutes and what can you do with that 5 minutes, things like that. So I very much enjoyed that. I'll also confess that I read for escape as well. So more often than not, I'm probably reading fiction as something. To me, that's my SEL, is finding time to read. But I really enjoyed Lead from Where You Are.
Oh, that's great. No, it's important to read other than professional reading. I agree. I need to be better at that, taking time for myself. So, well, Sara,
I think we all do.
Yeah. Thank you for taking time today. I really appreciate it. And I so look forward to watching you as you go through the year as Iowa Teacher of the Year. And once again, congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to really be hitting the road and traveling to all the different parts of our state. Thank you again.
I hope you were able to benefit from the perspective of Iowa's Teacher of the Year, Sara Russell. If you'd like to learn more about addressing and preventing staff burnout, be sure to connect with SAI Professional Learning Director Dana Schoen and your colleagues for a 3-part virtual learning series on addressing and preventing staff burnout beginning on October 6th. Sign up on the SAI website using the events link. To celebrate Principals Month, Paul Winger, NAESP, immediate past president and a past president of SAI, will join us to talk educational leadership and from a national perspective and why he encourages educators to pursue the principalship. We hope you will join us again for the next episode of It's Been Said.